Well, hello and welcome to this latest Mobility Presents podcast. Today we'll be talking about the everywhere enterprise and all matters security in this strange period that is seeing so many of us working from home and likely continuing to do so for quite a while yet, unfortunately. That situation has significant security challenges, and to discuss those with me, I'm delighted to be joined by Simon Biddiscombe. Simon is the CEO of MobileIron, a pioneer in the field of unified endpoint management solutions with over 20,000 customers and counting. Simon, welcome along.
Hey, thank you very much. And thank you for everybody who chooses to listen to the podcast. Time is much appreciated.
Simon, there's so many different ways we can approach talking about the pandemic. IT, of course, is only a small part of, this unfolding scenario. But from your point of view, you've had a ringside seat, I suppose, because endpoint management has come really under the spotlight. How's it been for your company, and what have you been observing from your customers?
Yeah, it's been a surreal 6 months for just about everybody on the face of the earth as we try to navigate our way through the pandemic at this point in time. And while MobileIron has been a beneficiary of the crisis itself in terms of the performance in the business, it's never lost on me that we've had employees who've lost loved ones to the virus over the course of the last 6 months, including just over the course of the last few weeks and so on. So it's tough for everybody to navigate through this incredibly difficult situation. From an IT perspective, I think the interesting part is how do employers think about making sure that, to your point, employees who are now working remotely and having to navigate through those challenges have secure access to any service they need to be able to perform their job. And when we think about how MobileIron is enabling a secure workforce and this concept of the everywhere enterprise, which I think is here to stay, I think we expect that post-COVID, and as people try and figure out what a new way of working looks like on a global basis, this idea of having a highly distributed workforce is here to stay. And for us, making sure that those employees can get their jobs done, maintain the maximum amount of productivity on any device, regardless of where they are, without compromising privacy associated with either the personal side of what they're doing or the corporate side of what they're doing, is critical. And we'll see how it all plays out over time, but undoubtedly a surreal time that we're all trying to navigate our way through.
A lot of the CIOs I speak to tend to say we actually came out of it fairly well. Initial flurry, a lot of panic and a lot of challenges in getting people productive and in productive environments initially, but they were pretty delighted generally, I think, with the way end users and the organizations responded. But I think something that's hidden from a lot of end users are the security threats. Can you talk through a little bit about what some of those might be when you have a workforce suddenly working from home?
Yeah, so if you think about the various different types of threats that we become concerned about. So whether it's network level threats, device level threats, application level threats, or frankly, just the user themselves, there's an entirely different set of challenges that every CIO has to worry about in what we'll call kind of the traditional world, right? So think about the traditional security perimeter, which would have involved the IT organization issuing a PC to the employee, and that PC being completely locked down by the IT organization, then connecting over some kind of locked down network, whether it was a wireless network within the building or an Ethernet network within the building, and then ultimately connecting to traditionally on-premise services in people's own data centers that they had complete control over. The idea of that device, network, and service data center being completely locked down is something that's become highly insufficient in the world we live in today. So as we look at it, forcing people to work from home redrew those security boundaries overnight, to your point. And many customers were well prepared to be able to deal with this as they think about people now working on mobile devices as well as PCs, connecting over public networks. And those public networks may have been a cellular network, so they may have been Wi-Fi networks in Starbucks or at home or wherever people are working, and ultimately connecting to not just on-premise services, but cloud services, a transition that's been happening for an extended period of time. So for most of our CIOs, they got to that point very quickly, but they're continuing to think through the threats that exist at this point in time. And from my perspective, actually one of the biggest threats becomes phishing. And if you've got a mobile device, it has an entirely different set of phishing vectors that can be attacked than a traditional PC. We're all really comfortable with the idea of phishing on a PC. We're not typically familiar with all of the phishing attacks that may occur on a mobile device. So if you think about SMS level attacks, if you think about attacks that might occur within WhatsApp and Snap and so on, If you think about traditional email, even with on a mobile device with a very different form factor than you're used to dealing with, you end up with a whole series of different risks associated with that. And then, as I said, associated with network connectivity, if you think about people's ability to download applications that are malware, if you think about people's ability to attach to networks that may have been subject to man-in-the-middle attacks and so on. When you had lockdown environments, that was one way of thinking about it. But when you actually move to very open environments driven by people working from home, you end up with an entirely different set of challenges. And that's where, from our perspective, making sure that people are thinking about device level security becomes that much more critical in this surreal world.
The tragic thing with any of these awful events is that the bad guys attempt to benefit from that environment. Have you seen a significant increase in different types of attack?
Yeah, that's where the part of the phishing conversation becomes relevant again. So when you look at how the bad guys are attacking at this point in time, phishing becomes that much more critical on mobile devices that often are personal devices. So if you think about the PC is typically issued to you by the organization. The mobile device in many, many instances is a BYO type scenario, and the corporate IT department doesn't have anywhere near the same degree of control over what you're doing with that device. So as bad guys figured out exactly that's the way things are happening, you end up with phishing becoming a critical way on mobile devices that people are looking for credentials, and ultimately that's what they want, right? They want your username and password. And the question becomes, once you've got that username and password, what is it you're going to be able to do to extract value as a bad guy from the information that you've been able to glean? And as we've moved to that work from home situation, it's become really apparent to CIOs that's actually become one of the biggest threats that they have to be able to manage at this point in time. I think it was the Verizon report of just a couple of months ago that characterized that as being one of the biggest priorities that CIOs have on a global basis right now. How do they think about preventing various different types of phishing attacks on mobile devices that are typically not completely under their control the way that PC historically would have been? And the bad guys know that's exactly where they should be hunting as well.
And as you say, Simon, around about 6 months, can you believe, since we entered this brave new world, and now we're going to a different stage, I suppose, where a lot of companies are talking about adopting a hybrid model where some of the staff come back some of the time, perhaps at only certain times of days. Do you see IT and SecOps teams making rapid changes in order to accommodate some sort of continuation of the work from home model?
Yeah, we have, and we've seen some quick fixes for businesses attempting to accommodate work from home quickly and cheaply. Frankly, I think initially people wanted to figure out how to do it as cost effectively as possible, and VPN is one of the areas where that initially happened, especially around traditional PCs. And many companies were forced to support remote workers using applications in their own data centers at that point in time. And if you think about any remote access to on-prem services, VPN concentrators that handle secure incoming links from all kinds of devices, including remote mobile devices, become that much more critical. They're usually configured to handle a kind of an average number of connections, but demands that were placed on those systems have just been incredible. And you ended up with something of a bottleneck relative to those VPN-based technologies, especially at the very beginning of the crisis as IT organizations tried to put people in place. But we've always believed IT has got to think about these things differently. It's got to think about its users and user experience, and it's got to think about their mobility needs as more and more workloads actually move to mobile devices and away from traditional endpoints. And the fact is that, if you think about the working day and how people are behaving with their devices, how they're using those devices on a day-to-day basis, that's here to stay. And investments that are going to be necessary in order to secure mobile devices are going to be a critical part of how the enterprise has to think about, the foreseeable future. And when the combination of UEM, MTD, IT actually ends up in a position where it can separate off enterprise-only sections of the device so that they can manage who runs it, which areas is the user able to get to, and protect company data. And they can actually block people from connecting to company networks via insecure Wi-Fi and protect employees from phishing attacks, as I said, and rectify those security problems with applications. So there's no doubt that there's going to be kind of a quick fix, and in the long run, there's going to be a more well thought out way of thinking about how to accommodate employees who are going to be in a work from home model for many, many years to come.
We've had that conversation with CIOs on this podcast series and in other environments also, where they're talking about making calls between spending more on the remote worker security and productivity, environment, perhaps better devices, better broadband, more security, more group-aware collaboration type suites where people can work together virtually more effectively. And of course, there's a cost to that. On the other hand, if companies are really going to go away from a lot of real estate, they're going to claw back a lot of money there. You're over, most of the time at least, in California, aren't you, Simon? I'm over here in London, two hotspots for office space and office cost. Are you seeing that kind of creative budgeting and different way of thinking about how we sponsor these changes?
We're certainly starting to see it. I think most companies, especially in densely populated cities, when you think about New York City, when you think about San Francisco, when you think about the Bay Area more broadly, which is where we, along with many of our technology peers, are actually based, you're going to see a very different footprint for most of us moving forward. And I think we've all come to an acceptance that the idea of work from home is something that can be embraced, and you can continue to drive productivity out of the organization in a way that makes sense ultimately for shareholders, customers, and the employees themselves. As I think about the challenge specifically for MobileIron, we're not at a point where, like a Facebook or like an Okta, we've said, we're willing to accept that you're going to work from home forever. But we are at a point where we're thinking through employees in multiple different categories. And those categories start with the types of roles that have to be in the office full-time every day. And then there's a second category that says, okay, these are people who need to be in the office 2 days a week, 3 days a week, whatever it is. And they're there primarily because they need some degree of interaction with their peers in order to get their jobs done. And then there's a part of our population that we know can work from home permanently. And we, like many companies, are navigating our way through who falls into each of those three different categories. And then what does that mean to our physical footprint moving forward? Now, while California is headquarters, it's never lost on me that there's a big part of our population that's in India that's also got its challenges associated with the virus at this point in time that they have to be able to navigate through. And Indian buildings were typically more densely populated than buildings in Western Europe or North America. So for me, there's also a part of this that's about making sure our Indian employees are also thought about in perhaps a slightly different way, but ultimately with consideration being given not only to their health and safety, which is priority number one, but number two, the long-term needs that they're going to have and the long-term needs that the business is going to have. So we, like many, are thinking through what that new normal is going to look like. I think it's going to take most of us a little bit of time to decide and pull the trigger on all of the actions that would fall out as a result of that. But it is not going to look the way it did in early March and prior to that when we decide what that new normal is. And for us, the benefits to the business today certainly outweigh the negatives. We just have to make sure that we can continue to thrill our customers and keep our employees safe, healthy, and super productive as it relates to getting their work done.
Absolutely. We're all learning on the job as we go here. But have you thought about how firms prioritize steps to make home working more secure? We always try to be quite practical on this podcast and say, look, this is a good place to start. Don't forget about this. Have you got any insights along those lines?
It's actually interesting. So as you think about the need to change the way IT is managed, you've got to embrace this everywhere enterprise idea. So you can't pretend that your organization isn't going to go through a significant change as you find that new normal that pops out the other side. So as I've talked to hundreds of our customers, and frankly, as we've looked at the largest customers that are the MobileIron customers, who are in most instances prospering through this challenge. But we've got our fair share of customers who are in airlines and hospitality. We've got customers who are in retail who are certainly struggling at this point in time. And I think that those who embrace the everywhere enterprise are going to be those best equipped to succeed as they move forward. And this idea of the everywhere enterprise and an IT model that supports customers everywhere, enables employees everywhere, and manages the deployment of business services necessary to do jobs across distributed infrastructure is here to stay. And it's going to be a more critical part of how every organization has to think about its future. You're going to end up with new business models. You're going to have new vendor relationships, and your technology and architecture decisions, and frankly, the operating models that most organizations have to deploy, they're going to be redefined. They're going to be redefined. And for IT, the critical part becomes, how do I enable the business to be successful? So whether I'm in a business that's prospering through COVID, whether I'm in a business that hasn't found its new normal in terms of business level performance, or whether I'm in a business that is in a desperate state of struggle because of the crisis, the relationship between business and IT, I think, is going to become that much more critical as the IT organization starts to think about how to enable success, regardless of at what scale that success is going to occur. And if you think about the overall concept of zero trust, right? The zero trust approach deals with all of the security challenge posed by this perimeterless enterprise. And while you can continue to give employees seamless and secure access to all the apps they need to do their job, making sure that as IT, you've got confidence that everything is as secure as it always was in that lockdown world becomes that much more critical as you move forward. So yeah, I think the technology decisions people are making around the everywhere enterprise are going to be that much more important as they move forward, but it has to enable success of the business. It cannot be perceived to be an inhibitor of business success. That would be a train wreck for all IT departments at this point.
Simon, you tell me, when I think of MobileIron and I think about the early days of what used to be called mobile device management specific, I think about it as software that's going to help you check, quarantine if necessary, clean devices, when people come back to the office, commuters and people have been away on business travel and so on. Has your own business model changed a little bit and the direction of your R&D and strategy changed a little bit as a result of the pandemic?
To a certain extent, yes, although I will say that the unified endpoint management stack is still a critical part of why customers choose to deploy our technologies. So essentially every customer we have, whether they're deploying our management stack, our security stack, or our identity stack, is doing so on top of the management stack itself. So we always continue to invest aggressively in the management stack. We have the best in breed product in the market. We have to make sure it stays that way in order to maintain our advantage against the competition with that specific set of technologies. To your point, it started with MDM, 13, 14 years ago at this point in time. And MDM became EMM when you added things like secure browsing, secure apps, secure content, and so on. And then EMM became UEM as you started to add a new set of operating systems as well. So if you think about Mac OS, where we've invested aggressively over the course of the last 18 months. You think about Windows 10, and increasingly as you think about Chrome OS as well in the enterprise. That UEM stack that now covers all operating systems and all form factors essentially gives us a much broader footprint than just the traditional MDM market would have been on iOS and Android. But if you think about that in itself, you have to continue to build on that footprint. And for us, the management of the device plus the security of the device was the first phase of the expansion of the footprint. For us, that's about mobile threat defense, making sure that as a device is attached to different types of networks with different types of applications, that we're able to secure everything that comes along with that. And then subsequently, if you think about the new biometric capabilities that exist on devices, started with thumbprints, has subsequently moved to various different types of biometric authentication using the cameras and so on. That gives MobileIron an opportunity to actually be the authentication layer to the device as well. And your device essentially becomes your identity at that point in time. You don't need to have a duo, you don't need to have an RSA soft token or anything like that. If you can conclude that the device itself, which has a certificate on it, is a secure form of authentication. And if you conclude that the biometric that gives you the human confirmation is a form of authentication as well, then you've got two layers of authentication. I don't need to worry about a token or something like that, right? So the management stack is first and foremost in how we think about the opportunity. But then certainly as we think about the different threats that exist on a mobile device and our security offerings, and if you think about the different forms of authentication that now exist and turning your device into your identity, those have been areas of significant investment over the course of the last couple of years. And again, it all plays into what IT organizations have to be able to solve for within the context of a work from home, everywhere enterprise concept.
Absolutely. Simon, as we said earlier, we touched on this. A lot of folks now are going to be using their mobile devices. They might have purchased themselves. They might have gone through a BYO type scheme within the enterprise, but they're certainly using these devices a lot for consumer purposes, for family purposes, for home purposes. How much of a challenge is that blurring of the personal and the working lives in the digital space?
That's real. I mean, it's real for our IT organizations. So BYOD has actually been blurring that concept of personal workspace for best part of a decade at this point in time. And it becomes a bigger issue than ever before as people use those devices as their primary way to perform their work on a day-to-day basis. So yes, there are many benefits from BYOD that most businesses enjoy: reduced costs for devices, enhanced productivity as people are working in restaurants and bars and every other location they are around the globe. But it does create a further erosion of that traditional network perimeter, meaning that you have to have more advanced security protocols than ever before. On the other side, users are worried about their privacy, right? And that's a real concern for many of our end users as IT loads more and more different applications onto devices. They are concerned that Big Brother is watching. They're concerned that they don't understand what it is that IT can see. Can you see my email? Can you see my texts? Can you see my pictures, photos, whatever it might be? And users get that much more concerned about their privacy when you're accessing business resources from their personal devices and so on. And it's a concern that's frankly justifiable, but it's up to the businesses to make sure that they can put those fears to rest. So when I think about the investment in unified endpoint management as a great way to start that data security journey, we actually can show you what it is that the user can see and what it is that the company can see. So as a user, I have absolute clarity around what is it the company can see on my device and what is it they can't see. And that's done by kind of containerizing and protecting the data and applications through application sandboxing and the MDM being able to tell you what's been sandboxed or not. And then device encryption can also be deployed, so only authorized users can access crucial data as well. So you do end up with ways to guarantee privacy over personal applications while securing enterprise data. But it's something that every IT organization has to be sophisticated in being able to explain to the end user, because the last thing you want is end users unwilling to use their devices because of the perception of the risk to privacy.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a ticklish point, isn't it? I mean, my feeling on this, by the way, is there is a tendency in IT to look at everything as being a binary issue. What tools can we have to address this? Some of it's about using a bit of human common sense and empathy as well, isn't it? That you educate, you train, you reassure, and that's more difficult to do when you can't look people in the eyes, but we're all hopefully getting better at being able to do these things virtually.
I think it's right. And I think the other part of it is the more individual applications you put on the device, the more you raise the concern level of the employee. And one of the ways that MobileIron has specifically taken that challenge on is all of our incremental feature set and functionalities. So when I talked about the UEM base case, and I talked about the addition of the security capabilities, the addition of the identity authentication capabilities, it's actually all embedded into one application. So the user doesn't have to see multiple different applications from multiple different vendors when they deploy the MobileIron solution. And because that MobileIron solution has been on the device for a decade in many instances, it's that much more comfortable for the user to know that more is being included in that individual application, frankly, if they ever figure it out, as opposed to the IT organization trying to push a separate application for defense, a separate application for identity, and so on and so on and so on. So one of the ways that we competitively differentiate ourselves is everything's embedded into one application that you've already got on the device. And we're going to continue to bring incremental feature set and functionality to that one application that should give the end user greater confidence around what it is that IT is doing.
It's about psychology and the human user experience, I guess. They're constantly seeing new modules loading and new installations needed, new icons appear on desktops. Then it can seem, as you say, a bit of an Orwellian Big Brother kind of threat, can't it, if you're not careful?
Yeah, very much so. And every company's got a conspiracy theorist, right? So, every company's got somebody who believes that, it is Big Brother watching. And not only can they see my photos and my personal texts and my personal email, they can see where I go when I browse and so on. That's obviously not the case, but you've got to be able to appease the ultimate conspiracy theorist as to what it is you can do, what it is you can see as the corporation. And that's how we think about the challenge that our IT organizations, our customers have to be able to take on. How do we make it easy for you to appease the ultimate conspiracy theorist who believes that you've got complete control over their device and you can see everything? That is how we think about engaging with customers and helping them solve the problems that they have. If
you can address the concerns of that guy, then you're golden, hopefully. Absolutely.
Exactly.
We talked about this weird world where, we talked for a long time for most of the last decade about how the world's becoming perimeter-less. And then it kind of really happened massive scale during the pandemic. So as you said, phishing and social engineering, remote attacks on the rise. But what about insider threats? Have they, by the same proxy, diminished, or do they continue just in a different way?
Oh, no, they continue. Make no mistake. When I talk to our CIOs and when surveys are performed across CIOs and CISOs, the insider threat continues to be an enormous threat. While we may lose sleep at night over the idea of hackers from foreign governments being able to get to our corporate information. In many instances, the bigger threat is the insider threat, and it's the rogue employee who may or may not have a grudge against the company at any point in time, deciding that they want to extract value from whatever information it is they can get their hands on. And I think that's been a challenge that most of our IT customers have recognized have existed for an extended period of time. And the working at home environment coupled with this lockdown actually does expose companies to additional risks of fraud and, frankly, the unintentional leak of confidential information. So in addition to the rise of kind of those opportunistic threats that I touched on earlier, as people realize that the security framework within which people are working from home is different, employees actually can start to feel detached from the workplace, especially if they're not physically present in the office. And there's some good research that's starting to be published now that talks about the mental anxiety that employees can feel as they try to navigate through this situation. And if they're beginning to feel anxious about job security, where they may have been furloughed, where pay cuts may have been introduced, where there's a threat of redundancies, then you do increase this idea of an intentional threat where staff have a greater incentive to harm their employer. And most of our customers recognize that that's a challenge they have to be thinking about. It was already a challenge coming into the crisis. Some of these new specific anxieties that we feel drive that threat level higher, no doubt about it.
And when you talk to customers, as I say, you're in the heart of Silicon Valley, or very close to it at least. What are the bosses and the IT leaders of companies saying? Is it still in that reassurance mode? Do they feel that they've got a good grip on what the next steps are? Tell me a little bit about taking the pulse of the modern IT leader.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think generally most of them are comfortable that they were able to deal with the first phase of work from home. And as we talked about, whether that was deployment of our types of technology, whether it was deployment of very basic VPN technology for PCs, for people to get to on-prem services and so on, most people are comfortable. They got to a place where the user experience did not significantly erode and where company information was secured as well as possible. So I think broadly, people think they did a good job. I think the challenge is going to be, how do companies think about investing moving forward in order to better protect those work from home employees? And as I said, what we're seeing is this shift of all types of thinking toward the everywhere enterprise and making sure that every workforce, which consists of unique individual employees, feels that they're contributing, feels that they're as productive as possible, making sure they've got the tools and services they need to be able to do that in a remote situation, as opposed to being in the office connected over traditional networks to services and so on. And ultimately making them feel as if they're still a significant part of the organization. You don't want your employees to start to feel distance because you can't give them the systems and tools they need to be able to do their job. And if you think about just collaborative tools, for example, all these workers will need to be supported with greater investment in collaborative technologies, video conferencing and so on. And you're going to have a greater dependency on remote technologies such as device management applications as things move forward. And the risk of attack also continues to grow. And as we've talked about, there's more avenues for hackers to be able to exploit in those types of situations. So yes, our customers will continue to deploy our best-in-breed UEM stack. They're going to be thinking about how to make sure that they're deploying our mobile threat defense technology. And then ultimately, they're going to be thinking about how they drive different authentication capabilities that bring greater security and, frankly, a different user experience that's much improved as well. So it's going to be a journey for many of our customers. We have to make sure that regardless of whether an employee is connecting to cloud services, they're working in a hybrid model, or they're connecting to on-prem services, that the user experience and the security of the data is never called into question. Then you keep your employees productive, and then hopefully you keep them engaged and not becoming concerned about the threats to their employment and so on.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, we do see some new usage patterns. We do see, as far as I can tell, anecdotally at least, acceleration of a move to cloud. And of course, the phenomenal story of Zoom. I'm sure everyone down your way is very excited. Hopefully everyone's bought some shares in them. But we're all living in a Zoom land now. And these can be wonderfully productive environments as well. But of course, they all have security implications, don't they? Which keeps the security industry moving at warp speed. Once a new opportunity comes along, better mousetrap, there's normally a significant change impact on the security threatscape, isn't there?
Oh, very much so. And if you think about early in the crisis, all of the Zoom bombing that was going on and so on, and unwelcome and uninvited participants showing up on calls, Yeah, those types of things are going to be the bad guy's way of taking advantage of a situation. And the bad guy will always try to be one step ahead of IT. And it's for us and it's for the other providers of applications that are necessary, like a Zoom, to be able to make sure that the experience is secure. And I think the Zoom guys ultimately did a good job of dealing with the Zoom bombing situation. Our type of technology being one that actually helps them solve those types of challenges. If you know that the Zoom call is coming from a managed device, you can be sure that it's not somebody who shouldn't be on the call at that point in time. But every new technology introduces a new opportunity for the bad guys to find their path to corporate data, and it means that we and others have got to make sure we're staying ahead of those risks.
Yeah, Simon, you referred a few times to what you call the everywhere enterprise. Certainly hit home. The notion of an HQ, or the notion of work being a place you go to rather than something you do, is changing really rapidly. We've talked often in cliched ways many years about this kind of phenomenon, but it's just really being rammed home now. I sometimes think, I'm probably showing my age, but the old Martini advert, anytime, any place, anywhere. That really is the sort of name of the game for the way IT has to be deployed now, holistically, and with the recognition that people are going to work in all sorts of different ways. I don't know if you wanted to wrap up or add something that I haven't asked you already.
I think the challenges that our customers have are broadly understood at this point in time. We've touched on many of those challenges throughout the course of the conversation. But I think at the end of the day, Martin, this is about making sure for MobileIron that we're enabling the secure workforce in the everywhere enterprise by ensuring that employees can get their jobs done, maintain maximum productivity on any device, anywhere, without compromising personal privacy, and making sure that security is always front and center in terms of the organization's concerns. Enterprise mobility has never been more important than it is today, given the extent to which people are working on mobile devices. And our range of agile enterprise mobility solutions, UEM, mobile threat defense, and zero sign-on, has enabled our customers to quickly secure their remote workforce during the pandemic and make sure that business continuity is maintained. And I think that's going to be how we think about the challenge. It's how our customers are going to be thinking about the challenge. And for us, it frames how we think about the investments that we're making in the business, such that we can enable the everywhere enterprise, maximum productivity for the employee, maximum security and protection of data for the IT organization.
Simon, that's just about all we've got time for, but we really could go on forever. It's a never-ending conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time from out there in the US, joining us in the UK, and we hope to speak to you again very soon. Thanks so much, Simon.
My pleasure, Martin, and thanks for the Mobility guys as well for sponsoring this, and we look forward to being able to talk to our customers and wish you nothing but the best as it relates to health and safety as we navigate through the next phase of this crisis. Thanks again.
Well said, Simon, and thanks so much for everyone for tuning in, and we hope we'll see you again very soon on the next Mobility podcast.